Alright, so let's get one thing straight up front. Black Butler is camp no matter which way you cut it. Here's some quotes from Susan Sontag's essay, Notes on Camp. They all apply to Black Butler in pretty obvious ways. It's over the top, aesthetically preposterously decadent, hyper-real, and takes itself exactly as seriously and as often as it doesn't seem to at all. This show's tone shifts more wildly than my own did back when I worked a grueling barista job and there was more caffeine in my bloodstream than blood. If you want a clearer example of what I mean and you aren't familiar with the series, let me just say that several small-scale emotional climaxes occur while a naked dog boy just kind of like hangs out in the background. Even though Kuroshit is published in a shonen magazine, Square Enix's G Fantasy, it's like not even a shonen. It's pretty much a reverse harem without the romance or a female protagonist, where the supporting cast of mostly impossibly beautiful men definitely non-sexually orbit around little boy main boy Seal in the same way they would a self-insert girl. It's a hair away from being one of those insane low-budge POV OVAs. So at the point of writing and recording the script, I hadn't seen any of the show's OVAs, but as it turns out, one of them is literally actually that. And it rules. Seal exists as just as much an object as he does a character. He's a vehicle for the Bishonen cast to perform their otherworldly skills to the audience. Seal gets kidnapped, Sebastian saves him. Seal gets Wolfemmed and kidnapped, Sebastian saves him. Seal's girlfriend gets turned into a doll, beautiful adults save her. Seal has to disband a cult, beautiful adults are at his aid every step of the way. This isn't a bad thing or a good thing about the series, it's just a thing about it. One that's important and relevant considering the archetypes and tropes that are particularly ever present within media centered on the Bishonen. Of the recurring cast, for example, you have the phenomenally talented butler man Sebastian, the grumpy child boy main boy Seal, the aforementioned dog boy, an Oji-chan, self-insert Fujoshi, Kagamine Len, and perhaps most famously, the flamboyant, flirtatious drag queen Grell. That is what Grell is, right? No, she's like super not. Grell is literally a woman, a trans woman. She refers to herself as a woman, she uses feminine speech, and most crucially, series author Yana Toboso refers to her as one. Of course, I recognize that just saying this doesn't inherently mean she's well-handled or good representation, but I'd argue that most everything about Grell makes at least a little more sense and belies a real intentional respect within the show's aesthetic and narrative language, and by extension, those of camp as a whole. Okay, I realize these things are going to sound really bad on paper, but work with me here. When Grell is introduced, she's revealed to be not the unassuming male butler she was posing as for the first few episodes, but one half of a duo that make up the show's interpretation of Jack the Ripper, who both stalk and kill young, promiscuous women who they see as wasting the privilege of having functioning reproductive systems. Grell then drools all over Sebastian before getting her shit kicked in and disappearing for an arc or two. Right off the bat, she's a lady killer by way of pussy envy, a classic transmisogynistic trope, and she brushes up against coming off as predatory, the other classic transmisogynistic trope. While I'm not interested in defending the presence of those tropes, context makes a huge difference for me. So, while Grell and her cis partner in crime, Madame Red, are literally murderers, so are a lot of the cast. Death doesn't necessarily carry a ton of weight within Black Butler's world. Furthermore, Grell's line of work is already death itself. She's a Grim Reaper, part of a universe-established organization of Grim Reapers. So the murders she commits, though outside her jurisdiction, come with a sort of flippancy that extends itself to their very framing. Grell is not especially tragically pained by her lack of a womb. It's Madame Red who's the brains in the operation. Grell is just kind of along for the ride because she doesn't have any moral objection to killing and she can empathize with Madame Red's own motivations. And where predation comes up, I wouldn't call it such, like at all. Grell is flirtatious, kind of a pervert, but in a fun way. She doesn't make anyone feel uncomfortable or unsafe. Her romantic inclinations are at worst annoyances to the rest of the cast. She vies for Sebastian's affection, but I don't even recall her talking about wanting to have sex with him or anything super explicit. She tries to get Seal to agree to let her kiss Sebastian in exchange for helping the duo on one occasion, but that's like Disney tier. As mentioned, even a flirtatiously heterosexual trans woman is in itself usually a comedic archetype, but we're dealing with a cast that is so ridiculously, transparently yaoi baity and horny on main, the girl's behavior is right at home. In a show already teeming with strong personalities personalities, Grell's is the strongest, and I mean that as a positive. That's what I like most about her. Even if Grell was just an effeminate gay man or a cis woman, she'd still be my favorite character, because above all else, she's the most fun. She has the most fun, and she's so cute. Her design is top tier. I love her shark teeth and the way her coat hangs off her shoulders, and her chainsaw. Chainsaws make everything better, that's just a fact.
Again.
I'm not trying to excuse the presence of trans-misogynistic tropes in Black Butler, but I really get the feeling none of them are present out of malice, or really any kind of deliberacy at all. Should the author have done research into what gender nonconformity means and how it comes across in media before she sought out to write a character that ticks those boxes? Should she have more deeply considered the machinations behind tropes and archetypes surrounding queerness? Absolutely, twofold. But when you're writing within an established genre, within an established medium, familiarity with said genre can feel like sufficient research unto itself. Furthermore, God knows the manga pipeline is so crushing that many mangaka have to act purely on a kind of sum of pre-existing knowledge, artistic instinct, just in order to meet deadlines. What's more noteworthy than that, though, is that Grell's embodiment of said tropes dissipates quite quickly. After her introductory arc, she acts more as a chaotic neutral ally to the cast than anything else. This is undeniably deliberate on Toboso's part, as I'll get into shortly. Before that, though, I think it's important to discuss that despite the author making her intent clear on multiple occasions and nothing within the text stating her to be male, Western fans still seem pretty unconvinced on the issue of Grell's gender. And I don't even think this is so much a case of people denying the validity of a fictional character's trans identity, so much as it is a series of unfortunate localization decisions that have had long-lasting ramifications to Grell's perception. The anime sub and dub both have the cast refer to Grell with he pronouns, but unlike a character like Soul Eater's Krona, Grell doesn't use masculine first-person pronouns or speech patterns, so what led Funimation to that decision? I can't point to a single reason, but rather a tapestry of small signifiers that, while we understand now were taken incorrectly, make consistent enough sense that I can see where the localizers were coming from. First things first, this was 2010, only a decade ago I know, but along the trajectory that awareness of trans issues has had, that's still fairly infantile. Grell Seiyu is a man, and she makes her first appearance as a male butler, and while those aren't statements about her identity, I could see how a localizer could see those as sufficient enough clues. Speaking effeminately doesn't necessarily denote you're a woman either, which I'll explain in depth a little later. Furthermore, it's still largely up for debate how the rest of the cast views Grell. Japanese doesn't use third-person pronouns the way that we do, so there aren't many opportunities for the cast to speak with gendered language about one another. This is a series that takes place in a heavily fictionalized and supernatural version of the early 1900s. It's possible that no matter how ridiculous much of the cast's antics are, they would be incapable of wrapping their heads around the notion that Grell is a woman. To make the decision that Grell should be referred to by the cast as a woman would have potentially ran the risk of making too grandiose and implicating a statement about the rest of the cast and the world they exist in. Of course, it's clear that the opposite is also true, so on some level I'm sympathetic to the decision Funimation made at the time, especially because it would still be a few more years before the series creator would make Grell's identity unequivocal. Let's run through a timeline of events for official statements about Grell's identity so we can see how things have developed. For the sake of demonstration, I'm going to be very rigid about what counts as confirmation of her identity, but I myself wouldn't normally split hairs so heavily. Grell's conception, according to the manga's editor, stemmed from a minor disagreement between Yana Toboso and the rest of the staff at G Fantasy in 2006. From the start, she wanted the reveal to be that Jack the Ripper was a woman, but the editorial staff wanted a man to make a rivalry that appealed more to the shonen demographic. Yana felt strongly about the character she had conceptualized, Madame Red, but her editor suggested a middle ground in giving Red a partner in crime, a Shinigami, with the only stipulation being that this Shinigami should be a character who could reasonably be voiced by someone like Takahiro Sakurai, but that beyond that she could design to her own satisfaction. This, of course, is what led to Grell. It's difficult to pinpoint from this alone intent on a microscopic scale. We don't know if Toboso decided to make this new character really drag it up as a subtle dig or joke at the expense of G Fantasy's insistence on a male villain, or if she came to that conclusion for narrative reasons, but this keys us into one of the biggest reasons I personally don't take issue with Grell being introduced as a serial murderer. She was retrofitted into and alongside the narrative of a pre-existing cis female character first, rather than her trans femininity being being necessarily intrinsic to her one-off killing spree. In a character profile from 2009, Grell, who is called a self-declared lady, speaks extensively about her womanhood. She talks about the steps she takes to be as ladylike as she wants to be perceived, and even says that she wants to undergo SRS. This is 100% enough for me to see her as a trans character and be done with it, but we can't take Grell's word that she's a woman as proof that the series sees her as a woman. This is for 3 reasons. First, about that sex change comment. Japan has a serious transmedicalism problem. There's still the very antiquated idea that if you're pre-op, you're not really your gender yet. So this, for Grell, could, if I'm being as uncharitable as possible for the sake of argument, mean that while she views her— that was almost really bad. While she views herself as a woman, she is not yet a woman. Secondly, the interviewer asks Grell about the way she speaks, namely the typically gay, hyperfeminine sociolect one kotoba. She responds that to speak any less feminine wouldn't be particularly ladylike. The Japanese word for sister, one, when talking about queer people, tends to refer to gay men who speak effeminately but do not necessarily dress the part, so to speak. Of course, for reasons I discussed when talking about Stop Hibari-kun, this has a lot of perceived overlap between queer men and transgender women. Finally, as I've discussed in other videos, the Okama stereotype is very easily conflated with transfemininity in Japanese media, meaning you could view her discussion of femininity as being for comedic value. It doesn't read this way to me, but again, we glean nothing concrete from this blurb save for how Grell sees herself. In 2010, on her blog, Yana Toboso described Grell as being a man, but with the heart of a maiden. This is a turn of phrase that is as pervasive as it is dated, one that recognizes the psychology behind gender identity, but one that reinforces strictly biological notions of sex. We're stuck being unable to glean the nuance of her language from this, but it reads to me as speaking rather charitably about Grell, recognizing her feelings about herself as being distinct from performativity or delusion. She has the heart of a maiden, there's no question about that. Okay, strap in, because this one's admittedly convoluted. In writing about a piece of Valentine's Day promotional art of Grell from 2012, Toboso calls her an Okama. However, in context, this is far more a matter of terminology than it is of archetype. So in Japan, it's heteronormatively customary for women to give chocolates, usually handmade, to the man they have feelings for on Valentine's Day. That chocolate is called honmei choco. Over time, this has transmogrified slightly to where it's now customary for women to also give obligatory chocolates to their male friends they don't have feelings for, referred to as giri choco, and to their female friends, tomo choco. Toboso says here that, because Grell is an Okama, any chocolates she'd receive from a girl would have to be tomo choco. On its own, this could mean as many different things as the term Okama itself, but if you were to view her as an effeminate gay man, that wouldn't preclude Grell from receiving honmei choco from a woman who was attracted to her. This means that Toboso could only be using the term Okama in the sense that Grell is at least not fully a man. Not a man enough for any woman who fancied her to be straight, anyway. 2018 saw Toboso tweeting a lot about Grell's gender. She describes Madame Red and Grell as being like sisters when posting some old sketches of the duo, but again, that's like sisters, so not necessarily concrete. She recalls in another tweet a time when she instructed Grell's stage actor to play Grell as a strong, career-minded woman. Whether or not this means, hey, really play up the flamboyancy in your performance is, again, something we're not privy to. However, do not worry, friends and strangers, there's a smoking gun. A Grell Rosetta Stone, not only for her gender, but of her role in the story as a whole. For the manga's luxury liner arc, I wanted to show that Grell is a really energetic and capable woman, which I felt I wasn't really able to show in the Red Butler arc. This isn't just a character who's always goofing around and messing up, basically. The phrase dekiru onna, translated here as capable woman, is significant in 2 ways. Obviously, it's an acknowledgement that Grell is a woman, with zero ambiguity, no room to mince words. Atop that, both in this tweet and when talking about the stage musical, Toboso discusses that it was never her intention for Grell to come off as incompetent or a comic relief character, and that she worried she may have accidentally led readers to that conclusion. It also seems like the staff for the anime's 2nd season were led to that conclusion. Season 1 sees Grell slowly develop into a useful asset to the main cast, but Season 2 jumps right back to buffoon. The anime caught up to the manga fast, so for the 2nd season, they were left to come up with their own story, and Holy shit, dude. Season 2 is one of the most audience-hateful pieces of television I've ever bore witness to. But, like, it's not just that. It also comes off equally hateful of its source material.